Today, we're going to be talking about some of the most important cards in your Pokemon Pocket deck, your trainer cards. We're going to run through all of the trainers currently in the game at release and talk about which ones are excellent and which ones are not so excellent and why. Let's start with the easy ones, shall we? Professor's Research and Pokeball are cards you should basically always be playing. Professor's Research, there are no exceptions. This card simply makes your decks more consistent by letting you see more cards in the games where you draw it. Its literal only downside is that you can't deploy another supporter that the same turn you play it, but there aren't enough critical supporters in the game in general that this is really much of a meaningful drawback. Likewise, Pokeball goes in almost every single reasonable Pokemon Pocket deck that you're building, having access to your basics more consistently while simultaneously thinning your 20 card deck out a little bit so you're more likely to draw everything else goes a long way. There are some very niche deck building situations where Pokeball is not a must play, but more often than not, both of these cards are going into every Pokemon Pocket deck that you're building. The next most important trainer in Pocket right now, in my opinion, is the supporter Sabrina. Her ability to force one of your opponent's bench Pokemon into the active slot gives you a ton of utility in a lot of spots. In the early game, it can generate tempo by swapping an inimdeal Pokemon to your opponent's active slot, forcing them to spend energy to retreat back to the thing they want to be attacking with first. In the late game, Sabrina can make or break a lot of really close games by pushing your opponent's active EX with energy on it back to the bench and pulling up something smaller that already has damage marked on it so you can get that last knockout point that you need to close out the game. Almost every Pokemon Pocket deck I've been building recently has at least one copy of Sabrina in it, and many of them want to be playing the full 2. Our next group of trainers are the ones you'll most commonly be reaching for after the auto includes that we've already covered. They are Giovanni, X-Speed, and Potion. Giovanni is a card that doesn't read like it does a lot at face value, but that 10 extra points of damage is often the make or break difference in a number of key spots. When you're playing Pokemon Pocket, you often want to be thinking about your games in terms of break points or how many attacks it takes your Pokemon to knock out the opponent's Pokemon. Adding just 10 extra points of damage in key spots can be the difference between taking 2 turns to knock something out and taking 3 turns, which is enough for your opponent to win the game. If your deck is aggressively slanted, looking to start dealing damage early and consistently, Giovanni's an excellent choice to be including to get those break points sooner in a lot of spots. Potion is kind of an inverse Giovanni, allowing you to heal your Pokemon and prevent your opponents from hitting their important breakpoints a turn sooner. A good example of this is, I think Potion is excellent in decks playing 90 and 100 hit point Pokemon right now because Mewtwo is very common, which normally knocks out 90 or 100 hit point Pokemon in 2 50-point hits, with Potion increasing that breakpoint to a third turn, often giving you important breathing room in a difficult matchup. X-Speed is an incredibly powerful effect that can help you gain back tempo in key spots. What I mean by this is X-Speed effectively is giving you an energy on the turn you play it by not making you give up an energy that you otherwise attach to the board. This effect is especially crucial inside of decks like Dragonite and Charizard, for example, that have Pokemon that they very explicitly don't want to start in the active slot but want to build up on the bench over time that you're going to regularly have as your starting basic and quickly want to switch out of. X-Speed means that you're not giving up your first energy of the game to get that backline Pokemon into your bench before you get going. Our next category of trainers is niche but great. These are things that are powerful but only in a specific context. The cards with this rating are Misty as well as Koga. Misty goes into most decks that are playing water Pokemon, and I think one important thing to think about with Misty as a card is that she does not explicitly have to be included with things like Blastoise EX or Lapras that want a ton of energy on it. Playing Misty alongside good water Pokemon like Starmie EX or even Golduck that attack for 2 energy is still phenomenal because if you hit 1 or 2 heads with Misty, you get to start attacking sooner and putting damage on the board faster, which is excellent without the need for an extreme high roll. Koga is a supporter that the more that I play with it, the more powerful he feels. I think the most important thing to note with this card is while it specifically impacts Weezing as well as Muck, you do not need to have both of these Pokemon in your deck to leverage Koga to great effect. In fact, I would go so far as to say most decks only want to be playing Weezing alongside Koga. Koga not only gives you a free retreat that allows you to scoop a Weezing up out of your active slot while it has a status condition like sleep or paralysis on it, but it also resets any damage that that Pokemon has on it, which is incredible given the fact that Weezing has 110 HP. You can often be using Koga as effectively a gain 90 or even 100 in the right situations, and all it costs you is losing the one energy that was attached to the Weezing, since you can play the Coughing back out immediately and then redeploy the Weezing the following turn. Our next category is trainers that are niche but still pretty good. This category contains Blaine as well as Erica, in my opinion. Blaine is exceptionally narrow, impacting only Rapidash, Ninetales, and Magmar, but his effect is quite powerful. Like I discussed earlier, Giovanni adding just 10 points of damage is quite a potent effect, and Blaine is adding 3 times that much, which lets you jump up and crack people for breakpoints that they're absolutely not expecting and are difficult for them to play around even when they correctly identify you as being a Blaine deck. I honestly think all 3 of the Pokemon that Blaine can currently power up that are in Pocket are pretty reasonable to be playing, and there's a few different ways to approach building your deck around this card right now. Erica is an effect that under slightly different circumstances I think would go from good to great. However, a lot of the deck lists that people are experimenting with early on in Pocket's life cycle right now are things like Mewtwo EX and Charizard EX that are ramping up one big hitter Pokemon, meaning that your characters aren't often surviving to make healing 50 worthwhile. That being said, in the games where your opponents are trying to beat you down with chip shots over the course of a few turns, this effect is really potent, and it likely still belongs in most decks that are playing grass Pokemon, in my opinion. Up next, we have some traders that are definitely niche and also kind of weak inside of the niche that they're enabling. Brock as well as Lieutenant Surge both leave a bit to be desired, in my opinion. They're both just kind of narrow in the scope of Pokemon that they hit, and the overall power level of what they're enabling tends to be on the lower side of what's going on in Pocket right now, in my opinion. Finally, we have some trainer cards that are just kind of bad in my opinion, and I don't think there's a compelling reason to be playing any of them right now. The first of these is Pokedex. Looking at your top 3 cards with no ability to rearrange them just doesn't provide a lot of value that a skilled player can't be guesstimating anyways. The one kind of niche use of Pokedex is that you can look at your top cards and then decide if you want to Pokeball now or in a turn from 2, since Pokeball can shuffle those cards away, but that's using 2 cards to get a pretty nominal upside. Next is Hand Scope, which lets you look at your opponent's hand. Again, this could be useful for confirming something you might otherwise suspect in key spots, but at the same time, once you're an experienced player who understands what you're going to be playing into, a lot of the information that Hand Scope's going to confirm for you is something you could be inferring with play skill anyways. Finally, I think Red Card is quite bad, and I'm honestly quite puzzled that people are playing it inside of their decks in Pokemon Pocket. From a pure game theory perspective, this card just doesn't pan out. Essentially, Red Card is at its best when you're taking your opponent's larger hand and reducing it down to just 3 cards, but the way the average decent deck in Pocket plays out, you're generally playing your cards out to the board, which means your hand tends to be small. In the rare cases where your hand is actually large because you can't play cards out to the board, it generally means your hand is bricked, and when Red Card is trading you 4, 5, or 6 bricked cards for 3 at random that could be useful to you, that's generally still upside. I think Red Card is one of those effects that has a strong mental bias in favor of it, because you remember those times that your opponent red carded you and they bricked your hand, and it's easy to forget the times where your opponent red carded you and your hand remained neutral or even got better. Overall, from just a pure theory perspective, I think the only real upside this card could potentially have is when paired with Hand Scope, so you can guarantee that you're taking away something useful from your opponent, but I think that that is so incredibly niche and take so many deck slots in a game where we only have 20 deck slots available that it is just not worthwhile. Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the video. If you're not familiar with me, welcome. My name is Jeff Hoagland. I have been playing card games for decades, and I've been making content for over a decade now. Pokemon Pocket is something I'm super excited about as a longtime Pokemon fan and a strategy card game enthusiast. If you enjoyed my breakdown here today, make sure you smash that like button to help more people learn more about the trainers they should and shouldn't be playing in their deck. Also, make sure you subscribe to this channel. This channel is going to be all Pokemon Pocket stuff, dedicated guides like this one, as well as deck roundups and highlights moving into the future. Appreciate everybody here's early, and I hope your early pack openings go swell.